I'm going to give a little talk about assembling a Hawken rifle, and then we'll get into questions about the state gun, and just play it by ear and see where the conversation goes. Um, I'd say probably we'll start with the wood. Probably 80% of the original Hawken rifles that I've had in my hands, about 80% of them are maple, the other 20% being walnut. Generally, um, the plains rifles are generally about 36-inch long barrels, tapered. They're always tapered, almost always tapered, inch and an eighth to an inch at the muzzle, with a hook breech. They're rifled normally 7 grooves. The twist rate varies from 4 foot to 6 foot. Um, some have patch boxes, most don't. They're generally what most people would consider a pretty plain gun, and they look just like a simple half-stock rifle. But when you get into the architecture of them, they're far from simple. They're quite complicated. There's nothing straight or square, or they're just they come together with a little bit of difficulty, to say the least. I've been doing these things for several years, and I don't think I could build a Kentucky rifle anymore because it's actually a different way of thinking. They're not the architecture and things are just completely different. Um, it generally takes me about 150 to 200 hours to build one. I start off with castings for the breech, the butt plate, the trigger guard, and then I buy lock and triggers and a barrel, and pretty much everything else I make. There's some good parts available depending on the gun you're trying to build. Usually, I wound up having to alter available castings and parts to get the gun parts for the gun that I want to build. It's a time-consuming process, and I'm I'm slowing down on it now. Um, I don't know if we got any questions about building of the gun. We'll try and answer that, and then we'll get into the Missouri State rifle, which was adopted last year and put on display in the Capitol now. So if anybody got any builder questions, have at it.
You said most of the half stock rifles were maple. Was that kind of just plain maple? Or did you ever see any with figure and all that?
Most of the guns are rather plain. There are some really fancy ones too, but as a rule, I like plain wood myself. For the first reason is that fancy wood will sometimes captivate your eye. You don't see the gun. Where with a plain stock, plain wood stock rifle, you see the architecture much better. And a Hawken rifle, there's no carving, very little engraving. The only thing they've got going for them is their architecture. And if it's not right, it's wrong. They're very narrow road or lane that these things have to be in to be architecturally correct. And the only way you can get that, you can't get it out of a picture. You just have to get your hands on as many real guns as you can and get a feel. I get as much out of feeling a gun as looking at it. I roll it around in my hands, and it just gives me a better vision of the gun when I'm feeling it rather than just looking at it. Well, I guess we're all.
How were the originals finished? Stock and
Well, you can never say always or never about anything. But as a rule, the guns that I've seen, and especially the ones that were in good enough condition that you can tell how they were originally done, they'll have just about all of them are varnish. And I don't know how dark they were when I started because it darkens as the wood ages. But they're generally pretty dark colored guns. Again, most of them are very plain. The barrels, some of them, I've seen them blued, some that I think were always brown, and a few that were left in a white and left to do color on their own. Um, Sights vary. You can't really. I don't put a whole lot of stock in the rear sights on the guns because they were different to begin with, and a lot of times a guy would, if he didn't like a sight on it, he'd knock it out and put another one in. So you can't really say this is the correct sight for a Hawken, that there was no such thing. I don't know if I answered the question.
Width of the stock at the breech and the lock following the taper and putting your spring under the barrel.
That's probably one of the most complicated. What? Oh, the question was, the lock panels, are they parallel with the barrel?
And fitting the width of the breech there to get the right width and the so you have room for the spring under the barrel and fit that lock into that.
That's
really tight.
To me, that's the most complicated part of building a Hawken, because the barrel is tapered as it goes back. It's tapered wider. It's wider at the breech than the muzzle. The lock panels on most guns, not all of them, but on most guns, if you look at them, they're tapered from the front to the back. They're wider at the front of the lock than they are at the tail of the lock. So you've got these two planes coming together at different angles, and it's tough to get them to fit together and then have it where you can still take the barrel out of the gun. That to me is the most critical part of building a Hawken.
I don't think you're helping me here. You're saying this is going to be hard work.
They're a chore. They're really a chore. If you just take, it's like anything else. You take your time, and
that looks like the thing not handling originals. Yeah, it's easy on the line.
yeah, they're and that's one of the things that a good Hawken's got to have. It's got to have those angles and that architecture, or it's not a Hawken, just another half-stock rifle. They're actually a pretty complicated gun. The buttstock of the gun will have a very subtle, I don't call it a high spot or whatever you want to, but they'll have a very subtle. I should have brought a gun with me to say, but they'll make on the lock side on the off side of the gun, opposite the lock. If you can imagine, like a very subtle high spot that goes, it would make an S if you came off the top of the gun at the breech, through the wrist, and then down low through the cheek piece, and then it tapers or runs back uphill at the upper corner of the butt plate. And then it's very subtle, but they've got to have that. And it's the same thing on the lock side. They do the same thing. It's just a very subtle. I don't know what you want to call it. Tape configuration where the high spot of the lock or the stock will come off the top of at the breech, through the wrist, down low through where the cheek piece would be on the other side, and then back up to the upper corner of the butt plate. Butt plates the original gun. You'll see cast parts and forged parts a lot of times on the same gun. I think the reason being is maybe that day they were out of entry pipes or nose caps or whatever, and instead of going to the foundry and getting new ones, more of them, they just go fire up the forge and make their own. They had the ability, I believe, to make any part they needed for the gun. I don't know how many barrels they actually made. A lot of times they would buy what I call it a blank. They were mostly, especially early guns, they were like wrought iron barrels, and they were a scalp of wrought iron forged around a mandrel, and then drive the mandrel out and finish ream and rifle a barrel. And I don't know actually how much of that they did. I'm sure they did some of them, but probably most of them were purchased. There was a place in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, that specialized in making barrels for everybody. Um, I think I think that they would get the barrel blank, call it a blank, would finish reaming the barrel in the shop and rifling it after the gun was pretty well assembled. And the reason I say that is the loops on the bottom of the barrel that the keys go through to hold the stock, attach the stock to the barrel, are generally on original guns. They're inlaid into the barrel. They're and to do that, what they would have to do is take a chisel and dig a hole in the barrel each end of the keyways, and then put them in and stake it in, pound the metal back around the staple to hold it in. And if they did that with a finished barrel, I can't see how it would keep from displacing material into the bore. So I really believe that they finished, reamed, and rifled them once the guns were pretty much assembled. There's examples where some of them are dovetailed in, but most are staked in, the loops.
Is there a standard
Uh,
tang length for the breech?
Is there a standard tang length?
Oh, the standard tang length for a breech? I would say no. The breeches are not the same. You look at them; they're similar, but there'll be several variations of the snail on the bolster. Um, I think they probably made some of them. Some of them they had done for them at a foundry, and then they were all individually filed up. So I can't say that there's a standard tang length for the thing. So they may be close or similar, but they won't interchange. Um, what's the
So are there major architectural differences between JNS and S rifle?
Yes, they
Repeat the question.
oh the question was, are architectural differences between S's and JNS's? JNS being the early gun. Jake and Sam were in partner from, some say 22 to 25. I think probably they got together in 1822, but I have nothing concrete to base that on. And then they were pretty much, if you look at a gun that's marked JNS Hawken, it's before 1849 because Jacob died in the cholera epidemic here in St. Louis in 1849. So it's pretty well accepted that a gun that's marked S Hawken is after that. JNS is previous to that. As far as the architecture goes, there you can see the early guns, the JNSs, there'll be very subtle differences in the two. One of the most outstanding one probably is how the cheek piece towards the front of the cheek piece comes around, and if it continued, it would actually go over the wrist of the gun. Where the S Hawkins are stopped a little shorter, and then again you can the early guns, the JNSs, most of the ones that I've seen have been walnut instead of maple. They're generally, or not generally, they are slimmer. There is no extra wood on them at all. And as the S Hawkins came to be, the early ones, you can see a lot of influence from the JNS, excuse me, from the JNS guns in the early S Hawkins, in that they'll be slimmer, generally a little bit longer forearm, and there'll just be variations of them that as they progress weren't there, namely the key spacing for the barrel wedges up the forearm. They'll vary. They'll be farther forward or closer together, or farther apart. They change. Where later on they became a little bit more, if you can say, standard, which they really aren't. But you can they as they progressed, they got a little bit more consistent. Say generally the earlier the gun, the slimmer it'll be. The later the gun, they get a little heavier. The guns that Gimmer made, he took off after he took over the shop. You can look at those, and they're actually, if you compare one to an early S Hawken, they're chunky. I think he liked fat girls. uh, it you if you see enough of these things, get your hands on them, you can kind of get a feel for about when the gun was made, make a semi-educated guess. But there's really no set transitions into things. They progress slowly to become what the later ones are. Any other questions? Well, maybe we'll talk about the state rifle. About a year ago, it went through the Missouri State Legislature to name the Hawken rifle as an official Missouri state gun. In that legislative session, there were a little over 3,000 items brought up for discussion. 34 of them passed, the state rifle being one of the 34. It was pretty long odds. When I was approached about doing a gun, I was kind of apprehensive at the start, and then figured, well, we got to do it. So we did. We built a gun, and it went through the legislature. It's now on display in the state capitol. It was done basically it's a start. What the genesis was, a highway patrol, Missouri State Highway Patrolman was thinking about this, and he came up with the idea of having a Missouri state rifle, and it should be the Hawken. So he approached a state representative, Maisie Boyd was her name. She's married now. It's Maisie Christensen. But she was her area's up around St. Joseph. She was a Republican, and a state representative of St. Anne area, around St. Louis, is a Democrat. Doug Clemens is his name. The two of them worked to get this thing through legislature, passed and approved. And it was quite an undertaking. It really was. People ask me about building a gun, and well, that was the easy part. The political end of it was far more complicated than the build. But it's all approved, taken care of, and it is in the Capitol and will be forever. Does anybody have any questions about any of this stuff?
What did you base the capital gun off of?
That was one of my points of apprehension, I guess you'd say. The gun that I chose, I happen to own it, which made it accessible. It was there anytime I needed to look at anything, compare or whatever. To me, it's the one gun that I would not get rid of. We were lucky to have the chance to buy the thing 20 some years ago. And to me, architecturally, it is the cat's ass. it's got everything that you would want in a Hawken Plains rifle. And after consideration and thinking about the available guns that I could borrow another one and use it to copy. In my mind, the gun that I use it's just a wonderful rifle. It's upstairs on display, by the way, but it's got everything you could want in a Hawken rifle. I you'll find some that are just as good, but you will not find one any better. And so that's how that one came to be.
What's your feel on when that gun was made?
That's a good question. Well, we know the S. Hawkins, we accept that the S. Hawkins were made post 1850. And after looking at these things, and that's part of the attraction to me to this gun, attraction for me to this gun, it's got several very early features. It's a very slim gun, first of all, and just the architecture of it is just a tip different than the later ones. My opinion, and this is just an opinion, and $4 and that'll buy you a cup of coffee. But it, my feel for the gun is was made somewhere between 50 and 53. I don't think it's any later than that, and it's definitely not earlier. It's just a great gun. It's got a little bit of engraving on the lock, which is pretty unusual. Let's say it's a very slim gun, and it has mixed parts on it too, forged parts and cast parts, which is not unusual on the guns. It's got I call it a pinch nose cap. If you look at the nose cap on the sides, it's like you took your fingers and squeezed it just to give it that little contour there, which is an early feature. It's just I don't think it's any later than 1853. I'm running out of stuff to say here.
On the state rifle, how did you finish the metal and the wood? What did you use?
What I wanted to do on a state rifle, this is my preferred finish is what I call an antique finish. It's what you're used to seeing in original guns. Now they were new when they had them. They were new. They didn't look like they do now. But what we see in the real ones is the aged finish, and that's what I try and emulate. Um, I I'll call it controlled rust. I rust the iron parts, and then the wood I'll stain it a little darker in places where it's protected, not handled as like on the wrist and the forearm. I generally leave that a little bit lighter, and I use I thin a oh gosh, a satin type spar varnish with lacquer thinner or something, and then I wet sand it with 400 grit auto body paper. That's how I apply the finish. Just use the auto body paper to apply the finish, sand it, and then take an old t-shirt or sock or something and rub off anything that'll come off. And then I set it aside for a day and do it again the next day. And pretty much just keep doing that until it gets where I want it to look. And I can darken things up or I can lighten them up as I'm doing the finish process. But that varnish is an excellent finish. It's very water resistant, or like True Oil or something like that is not good for these things. But that's what I do. I say I control rust the barrel. Just an example. I take polish it the way you want, so it's nice and all the scratches and dings are out of it. And then I take a piece of cotton rag and cold blue, just plain instant blue, and just dab it on. Don't rub it on, but dab it liberally on the whole thing. And I plug, the barrel's plugged, of course, and then I have piece of PVC pipe that I fill with bleach and immerse the barrel in the bleach. And it'll work pretty fast. And it's not always the same. Sometimes it may take 10 minutes, sometimes it may take a half hour. You just got to pull it out and look at it. When it looks like it's getting pretty evenly rusty, I pull it out, set it aside, let it dry, and then card, with a fine wire wheel, card off the loose rust. And then if you need to go back and touch up stuff, you can rub some cold glue on it. You can do all kinds of things with it afterwards. But in a nutshell, that's how I do all the like the butt plate trigger guard. Same thing. Dab them in, or dab the cold glue on them and immerse them in bleach, and watch it. Sometimes it'll take off fast. Anybody else come up with a question?
You said that the JNS Hawkins were thinner than the later S Hawkins. Do you think that was an influence of their father?
That's a good question. I don't know why. I can't say. They were definitely influenced by their father. Christian Hawken was a fantastic gunmaker, and he taught a whole bunch of his sons the trade. I think maybe tastes might have changed a little bit as the time went on. That why they got a little heavier as they progressed. Um, as far as saying why, I have no idea. I can't answer that for sure. But they definitely did get fatter as they progressed.
What's the caliber range on the plains rifles?
Caliber, calibers of the plains rifles generally. I've got it doesn't belong to me, but at the house now is a real early JNS Hawken plains rifle, and it's about 47 caliber, and that's on the small side usually of what you see. And they went from anywhere from that up to 58, and generally around 53, 54 calibers, the most common. The squirrel rifles, which is a whole nother ball game. We call them squirrel rifles. They're made for the local trade. They generally have used parts. They would recycle barrels and locks and triggers. They were in the business of making money. I don't think they threw anything away that was of use. I've got two squirrel rifles upstairs, and they both have used barrels, recycled barrels. They both have recycled locks. One of them has a dovetail plug where I guess the original gun that the lock was on was probably a drum and nipple. Well, I plugged that so it would work with the bolster on a patent breech. One of them, the other one has a lock that was originally a flint lock. You can tell because the prison spring hole's plugged, and it was definitely a flint. They just got rid of those parts and reduced it in size and put it on the gun, and it worked out very well. They didn't throw anything away. They were in business to make money, and they had no idea that there would be this kind of interest in this stuff now. So very few records, very little researchable information. Now there is a book going to come out hopefully soon. A friend of ours is doing this book, and he is the foremost Hawken guy alive today. He gets his book done, it's going to be a treasure. And it'll have a lot of these questions explained in depth. He gets into the Hoffman and Campbell rifles, which were another, I don't know if you want to call it a factory, another gun shop in town, contemporary with J&S Hawken, you know, pre-1850s. And those two guys, Tristram Campbell and Christian Hawken, or Hoffman, both at one time or another, and more than one time, they both worked for the Hawken shop. So there's a lot of similarities in the guns, but when you look at them side by side, they're altogether different. It's just a whole nother ball game, and he's going to get into that too with in his book. So it's pretty exciting. This thing's going to come out.
Who's the,
What kind of powder charges do you think they used back then?
Yeah, that's another interesting question. You look at the front sights on the old guns; they're short. They're always closer to the barrel than what we use today. And I think the reason being is, first of all, I don't think they loaded the guns with as tight of a patch ball to barrel fit. I think they loaded their guns a lot looser than we do ours. And the powder may be a little hotter now, I don't know. But I think probably the biggest difference is how they loaded them. The early guns, the real ones, they'll have a shorter front sight because of a lower velocity. What we do, uh, my guns, I have pretty much a standard load for a 54 caliber gun. I use 90 grains of 2F powder with a 54 caliber 530 ball and denim ticking, and they'll shoot higher than original will. So you have to have a taller front sight to compensate for that. I don't know as far as what powder charge they use. I can't say. They varied it, I'm sure. Double charged powder, or if they're out with grizzly bear country or Indians or whatever. But I think generally they loaded their guns a looser ball fit than we do, and probably less powder because you couldn't go to the store and buy it then. You know, it's so. As far as actually what charge they use, I don't know.
Might have talked about it earlier. What was the rate of twist, average rate of twist of the barrel?
They varied. Most of the books say 1 and 48 twist, which I can't argue with that, but they're not all 1 and 40. I think they varied from anywhere from 48 to 72 inches twist. My guns, the guns that I build, I generally use 1 and 66 inch twist barrels because they're right in the middle. And quite honestly, I can't tell the difference between, I've got 1 and 60 inch twist guns, 1 and 72s, and I can't really tell. I think the 72s are maybe slightly better if you're going to use a gun with heavy charges for hunting purposes. The 60-inch twist guns are probably a little bit better. You use a little less powder for target work. And honestly, the best shooting gun I've got, pound for pound, is a 60-inch twist gun. But the difference is so small, I can't tell the difference in it. But that's what I use between 60 and 72 inches. 66 being my preference.
Whose barrel are you using?
Whose barrel am I using? I used Mark D. Haas barrels for years. Well, Mark passed away. Now I use Rice barrels, and they are very good barrels. I don't use anything else, just, unless I got an old large barrel or another D. Haas or something. But my barrel of preference now that's readily available is Rice, and they're very good barrels. The lock, my preference is Bob Roller, but he's not making them anymore. Again, we're all getting older. I use Davis lock and Davis triggers. Davis triggers, I prefer them over any of them. They're just very high quality, and they work really well. And you can get them.
Are you still making rifles for people?
That's another good question. I've retired from my regular job 6 years ago, and I've been doing this pretty much full time ever since then, and seriously for 20 years before that. And it's like anything else, it gets old. It just gets where my wife and I were getting the age where we want to play more, do more, and do different things. And there's only so many hours in a day, so many hours in a week. So I have a list that I call it my call list. Somebody wants a gun, I'll put you on a list, but I'm not guaranteeing when or even if, and I have several names on the list now. I've always said that I did construction work for a living. I've always said that I've never had job security in my whole life. And now that I've got it, I don't want it. But yeah, I'm still building, one or two guns a year.
Who's the author of that book that's coming out?
I'd rather not say right now. He's pretty secretive, and he doesn't want people inquiring. So, but yeah. But he's
Let us
got.
know, though, Bob.
I'm sorry.
Let us know your tank.
Oh, it'll be pretty pretty well known. He's got more original Hawken rifle than anybody I know. He's been at it for years. He is the Hawken man.
Did the Hawken pistol come out the same time period?
Yeah, they made pistols the whole time period. The best one, my opinion, the best one came through Greg Grimes' gun shop 30 years ago. It's a J&S Hawken pistol, half-stock pistol, which I copied, and I have a real good copy of it on my table upstairs. But yeah, they made them, not a whole lot of them, because I don't know, hardly anybody makes pistols you get so much time in the thing, and you're not going to get the money out of it that you will out of a rifle, but yet you have to do everything you do to a rifle. So most guys don't do them, and it's very understandable why.
What was the survival rate of those? You don't see many Hawken pistols.
Well, the question was the survival rate of Hawken pistols. I don't know. I believe there were less of them to begin with than rifles by far. And in a pistol, we're probably more subject to being lost or whatever. So I think the survival rate is maybe percentage-wise a little less than rifles. There's more demand for the rifle. If a pistol broke, they may throw it away, where a rifle will probably get it fixed. That I have no idea. You don't see very many original Hawken pistols, but they're out there. Anybody else got any questions? Oh, Mr. Russell, what's up?
I've got just one statement. This Van Bill's gun is so fine that if you ever really want to see a super duper, go to Jefferson City, see the one that he made for the museum up there.
Well, thank you. I don't know if if you're all familiar with Art Russell. He founded or brought back the Hawken shop back in the 70s.
Well, actually, it was a business. It was a gun business. But that's my story. You'll get it.
So Art was, he brought back, he's probably, I would say it's very reasonable to say that he started the modern Hawken craze. He he was instrumental in bringing out these parts and putting these old guns back together, and it's been quite successful, really.
They, one of these things that sort of show our affection for one another is he's the only one that had the opportunity to take my love and old thunder, and he said, "Marty," he said, "I did something that I think should have been done." He said, "I stamped your name on the base of the barrel." He said, "That way, if they bury it with you, we can always check and find out if it's the original."
The gun that Art's holding now is the Hawken Shop 2, or whatever you want to call it, the modern Hawken Shop prototype gun.
This is the first. This is my poem that I wrote about the love of my life. Well, the second one. Is where my life comes here. And you'll understand a lot about it. Because I'm a little verbose. After dinner tonight, when I finish, we'll know a little bit more about it.
I think we probably should give credit to the man who was probably most instrumental in building that gun, a man named Keith Neubauer. And
A prince among princes came from some building.
Keith passed away in '98 at the age of 58. He was probably, well, without a doubt, the most knowledgeable person with Kentucky rifles and Hawkins, the whole bit. He was a professional restorer. He restored George Washington's pistol, amongst many other notable guns. But he was my mentor in this stuff. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't be here today. But yeah, it was quite an opportunity to get to know him. And an opportunity to get to know this guy too.
Good, bad, and different.
Anybody got any other stuff? I don't know what we can. Well, it's been a bull session. I don't know where we go from here.
Well, thank you, Bob.
Thank you all for coming and the interest.